My name is Udit Raj Sharma, and I am a professor at UPES School of Law. I have been pursuing academics for more than 3 years now. Just to tell you a brief about myself, I started the study of law in the year 2010 by enrolling myself in the course of BA LLB honors with specialization in energy laws. And then I moved up to do my master's with Indian Law Institute, New Delhi, in the domain of criminal laws. And thereafter, after pursuing a 2 years master's course with ILI, I went up to join academia. And right now, I'm also pursuing my doctorate course in the domain of animal rights. So I've had a experience of quite a diversified fields of law. And in capacity of being someone acquainted with energy laws, today I'm here to engage with you to tell you a brief overview about what energy law is all about, what are the career prospects of energy law, and how should one student approach the course of energy laws. So energy law probably is a misnomer. It should be rather called as energy law and policy, because in the domain of energy, policy becomes far more futuristic, far more important, and far more significant than the word law itself. When I was attending my first lecture of energy laws, or when we were first delivered a discourse on energy laws, I was made to think about the energy demands of 2030. So 20 years ahead, we had to think and conceptualize about a policy framework or a legal framework to regulate it. Now, just to tell a little about energy sector, because when we talk about energy laws, it is not some disconnected branch of law. It is a branch of law which encapsulates several other branches of law together, along with a specialist regulatory framework for energy sectors. Now, starting from constitutional laws, which deals with the allocation of natural resources, ownership of natural resources, going ahead to property laws, which talks about either acquisition of property for the projects or equity or acquisition of a right of user in certain property for pursuing certain things, to going ahead to labor laws, mining laws, environmental laws, because energy sector would have ramification over several other aspects like wildlife, flora, fauna, and environmental law comes into play. And then environmental impact assessment and several other concepts. So what is most pertinent to approach the course of energy law, first of all, is that we understand the interdisciplinary web, the interplay of business model of the energy sector. Because just to give you a little reference of a part of energy sector, let's say electricity. So a student of law would not be able to appreciate the required legal and policy mechanism unless and until the student understands that there is a role of regulatory mechanism to be played in generation of electricity, in transmission of electricity, in distribution of electricity. So first of all, the business model of each energy vector has to be clear in the mind of a student. And the biggest effort that a university, a course can offer to a student of energy laws is to acquaint the student with the requisite business model and the interdisciplinary perspective. Energy lawyer need to know economics, an energy lawyer need to know the business model, and energy law need to lawyer need to know the risk capital affairs that a state engages in, allocation of natural resources, and several other things, and the current trends, because obviously the forms of energy that human civilization has been using has been changing over the years. Uh, a great dependence on coal for approximately 100 plus years is now slowly shifting to power, and from power slowly shifting to renewables and nuclear and several other aspects. So the most important thing to appreciate for any energy law student is to understand the underlying business model, underlying mechanism, so as to understand where policy might play a role, where legal mechanism might play a role, and how different regulatory authorities, etc., can engage and facilitate the model. In fact, if we historically look for energy sector, the aspects such as privatization becomes so very important to understand. I mean, since 1991, when liberalization, privatization, globalization happened, I think the biggest impact it had was on energy sector. Uh, the level playing field was created for all players in oil and gas sector. So foreign players were invited because I mentioned the term earlier, risk capital. The most difficult aspect with oil and gas sector is exploration of natural resources. It involves huge funds, huge machineries, and a, gov- a state, a government like ours, which is a developing country, cannot afford to invest in such a huge risk capital. Just assume you spend 6,000 crores over a project, and when you actually drill a well, you find nothing. It will be a disaster for an economy like ours. So an economy, any developing economy for that matter, tries to devise a policy where it does not engage itself directly in the risk capital. Though if the players engage in the risk capital and they happen to discover oil, gas, whatever resource, then the government will find its stake and share the profits. So the idea always has been like this. Therefore, understanding business model and interdisciplinary perspective is the biggest challenge. Now, as I told you, that energy law is not some distinguished branch of law which has no connection or overlap with other branches of law, primarily with the constitutional law, as to which part of the government has power to legislate over which aspect, which fossil fuel, which resource, then coming to the allocation of various natural resources and the right of different governments to regulate them. Then coming from there, the property law, as I mentioned, the right to either acquire a property or right to acquire a particular kind of right in a property, all that will be needed. The requisite understanding of environmental laws, financial laws, taxation regimes, labor laws, mining laws, all that will be required to encapsulate something called a course of energy laws. Now, broadly telling about the energy sectors for which different regulatory mechanisms have to be in place. Broadly, we can classify it into first oil and gas, second power, third coal, four nuclear, and fifth is renewable. So we can broadly classify it in these phases. Now coming to oil and gas, which is the biggest one, first, there are broadly three kind of activities that need to be regulated. It is famously called as upstream, midstream, and downstream. So how you get a natural resource from core of the earth, from from the bed of the ocean to the surface, all that involves upstream activity, which is the biggest, most financially turbulent, and most risk-taking affair of any oil and gas player, because it involves huge investments, and then there is no likeliness of any success. There's no guarantee of any success in that. So upstream exploration and production requires great amount of policy making, foresight, effort, facilitation, and the government of India, and so as the government obviously of different parts of the world, are effectively engaged in how to pull different foreign players, different private players into this risk capital affair of exploration and production. In India, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas is the main body which regulates it, along with a bureaucratic body, DGH, which is Directorate General of Hydrocarbons. And we have different policies in place, from NELP, which is New Exploration Licensing Policy, to right now HELP, which is Hydrocarbon Exploration and Licensing Policy, which basically regulates it. Coming to midstream. So once you have fetched the oil from the core of the earth and brought it to the surface of the earth, then what do you do? The process of refining, the process of transporting it to a place where from it could be further refined and distributed is another complicated task. So midstream is another area which requires great deal of regulation. And the third area is distribution. Once you have fetched out the oil or natural gas and you've converted into something usable, how do you distribute it equitably to the, as per the needs and demands of the people, pricing mechanism and everything that comes into play? Petroleum and Natural Gas Board is the prime body in India which looks at this downstream sector of oil and gas, right? Um, so this was the brief about oil and gas sector. Now coming to another most prominent sector here, which is power, which we also call as electricity. So electricity generation, electricity transmission, electricity distribution. All three have been a great area for exploration for researchers, academia, policymakers, litigators, and there have been creation of different kind of tribunals and different kind of regulators for all these activities. Now, Electricity Act 2003 is now a prime legislation which deals with all three of them. However, along with that, there are a number of policies which supplement um, the activities of power sector. The bodies such as Central Electricity Authority, Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, State Electricity Regulatory Commission. These are the prime bodies, along with certain judicial tribunals like appellate body for electricity disputes, APTEL, then CERC, SERC, which are quasi-judicial bodies. So they do also look into complaints. Now, a brief about power sector. Now, coming from power sector to the most developing branch, which is renewable. So um, extracting energy from shale gas, coal bed methane, from hydroelectric sources, from wind energy, from biomass energy is another dimension. And the governments have started taking interest in the policy making. The academia, the research has started taking interest a great deal in developing and in foreseeing what kind of policy mechanism and regulatory mechanism would be needed to address these things. And therefore, new terms like RPO, renewable purchase obligation, are very common these days, where governments are positively coming up and putting obligations on the various stakeholders and players of the market to contribute a share of their generation of electricity from renewable sources. And there are so many legal, procedural, regulatory complexities that are involved in all these, which requires a great depth of understanding, along with obviously understanding the business model, the stakeholders involved, the impact on society, the impact on environment, the impact on consumers, the impact on taxpayers, the uh, obligations of a stakeholder towards taxation agencies, etc. Now, other than renewable are one particular area is coal. Coal has been historically very significant source of energy for humanity, and now the dependence on coal is decreasing day by day. Every effective economy is trying to reduce its dependence on coal sources. In India, a famous controversy regarding the coal block allocation must have been known. It was quite infamous across the globe recently. And from coal comes the nuclear energy, uh, is still a very comprehensive, a very far-sighted, and a very effective mechanism, legal and policy both, is yet to be devised as far as nuclear energy is concerned, because it comes with a lot of cost, it comes with a lot of risk, and to ensure its feasibility to the lives of the people, to the environment, to ensure all that, a lot more is going on in terms of research, scientifically, legally, and in the terms of policy, and how to make it cost effective, how to make it accessible to the people. All those challenges are going on already. Now, as far as in the oil and gas sector, I did mention about oil, but as far as the exploration, distribution of gas is concerned, recently the trend of city gas distribution, piped natural gas, is taking charge. You must have seen that in most of the areas, even residential societies, when you shift, you don't have to really arrange for the cooking gas. It's the piped natural gas which is reaching you to the door. So these mechanisms are also in place, and these are slowly and gradually developing. So they do interest the governments, they do interest the policymakers, the researchers, and obviously a lot of disputes do come through that. Now, this was briefly about the overview of energy sector and what energy law and policy could cater to. Law intersects in different capacities. As a regulator, First of all, I mentioned about Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. There are several policies that the ministry keeps on making each and every time to regulate the oil and gas sector and the power sector. Now, when it comes to different legislations, now how a particular a block has to be allocated, how from where to get the mining lease, from where to get uh, um let's say there is no discovery, then whom do you pay the cost to? From where do you get sanctions to get the technology for this? And are there any fiscal advantages that are given to you if you are investing in this risk capital? All that comes through legal and policy mechanisms, right? This is just one instance. Now, coming to power sector, a brief reference from intersection of law and power sector. You must have heard about theft, a very common instance that people hear. You must have heard of electricity theft also, right? So, theft of electricity, there was a lot of confusion with regard to the jurisdiction of theft of electricity, whether it should be an offense under Indian Penal Code or in the way back Electricity Act of 1910. Now, Electricity Act 2003 comprehensively caters to the offense, and this is just one instance. There are several kind of disputes which may arise in generation, in transmission, in distribution, particularly distribution, because there you directly connect with the consumer. Let's say you are a consumer and you've used 400 units of electricity, but you've got a bill of 4 lakhs. Will you not be shocked? Will you not be approaching the requisite distributor and then requisite regulatory authority like State Electricity Regulatory Commission or Central Electricity Regulatory Commission with an appeal? So there's a lot of dispute in there. These are just some instances which even common man can relate to. And if we talk about complicated aspects, there are so many aspects, starting from the conceptualization of a project till the actual execution and actual day-to-day disputes that keep on arising. Now, when a student is actually approaching energy law and policy, the student must first try and understand the business model, must first try and acquaint himself with the respective sector he's dealing with. If it's oil and gas, there's a huge amount of technical knowledge that's hidden in the business model of oil and gas sector. When it comes to um, power sector, there is again a huge amount of technical knowledge that is hidden in the business model, and only then comes a natural inquiry in the mind of the student that where would the law be needed to regulate, and in what forms, and through what regulatory agencies. Then comes the understanding of law, policy, disputes, solution, remedies, and different kinds of thoughts. So first, one must understand this way, must comprehensively look at the sector in all its interplay of interdisciplinary knowledge, and then probably go on to approach it. Way back in 2010, when I started as an energy law student, there were hardly any moot courts or competitions happening on energy law. But today, there are a lot of moot court competitions specifically happening on energy law. There are several judgment writing competition, article writing competitions across the globe that are happening solely on energy laws. There are so many diploma courses that are happening in energy laws, and there are different master programs in different energy law branches. So now a student has much more avenues to go for such moots, go for such article writing competitions, to acquaint more with the growth of energy sector. Particularly, student has also to be abreast about the developments that are having in energy sector, right from oil and gas to power to whichever source or whichever field a student is interested in. So updation about the current trends, recent judgments of different courts, especially the Honorable Supreme Court. I think these are certain things a student of law generally, but energy law particularly must do in order to gain good insights in energy laws. Now, coming from here to the career prospects that energy law or energy policy study might bring. So there are, first of all, energy, dependence on energy, study on energy, research on energy. I mean, this is sort of a never ending thing. So the prospect is never going to get over. It is only going to increase because we are diversifying the forms of uh, our dependence on different energy sources. Now, let's divide that into internationally and nationally. As far as international prospects are concerned, the avenues for research, the avenues for uh, academics, the avenues for representing yourself into different corporations as in-house counsels, that career prospect is open already. Now, coming to national forums, again we can divide it into governmental prospects and the prospects apart from government. When it comes to governmental prospects, being into policy making, being into different regulatory authorities, having necessary acumen of energy laws, etc., and serving as a government official, as a regulator, that's one prospect. Definitely, research and academics is common to both. And now coming to the the prospect apart from government, the biggest prospect is about the disputes. Um, there are so many regulatory bodies that are running, that are operating, that are settling disputes. And just to tell you, 24% of global arbitration cases are coming from energy sector, which means that the players in energy sector would not like to go to the courts quite often. They would either like to settle the matters out of the court through arbitration mechanism, through mediatory mechanism, or if at all they have to depend on such regulatory bodies, instead of court, they would like to address the matters to the tribunals. Even the lawmakers in the country are taking due attention of this, and they are creating several tribunals for effective resolution of disputes. So there are so many bodies where one can practice and litigate. Um, and mind you, there are very few people who are actually experts in energy laws who solely take matters on energy laws and discuss them. So definitely there's a lot of potential there. Now, law firms do have a separate branch of project finance where energy experts are obviously needed, because in order to plan a project, whether it's a power project or oil and gas project, they do need expertise. They do need suggestions and legal recommendations on different angles. And for that, I think there's a huge career prospect there in terms of law firms also. Now, I did mention that now the world is globalized, and and especially energy law and energy sector is more globalized than other sectors of the world, probably because even a pipeline can encompass through different countries of the world to, um, to share resources, whether it is gas or whether it is a particular oil or something. So there are so many things that are transnational when it comes to energy laws and energy policy. Now, when it comes to international exposure with regard to higher studies, research, academics, definitely there is a great amount of exposure there. A lot of uh, reputed universities and very credible universities are starting courses on energy law and policy, energy and environment, energy and future, energy security, energy economics. So a lot of things are happening in there. So if the research is going on such niche topics and courses are structured on such niche topics, then broadly on energy law and policy, nationally as well as globally, there are great avenues of research, learning, academia, even work. So it's absolutely open for students to get exposure globally, right?